Welcome back to World War II TV, folks. We are continuing our series looking at the German-Soviet War. Nina Janz returns to the channel to talk about how other nationals were incorporated into the German military, including from Luxembourg. So she's widely known in Europe for conferences and teaching and researching. So welcome back to the channel, Nina.
Thank you.
So how did you become involved in this project? Because a lot of Jeff's contacts were in Canada, where he obviously is, and North America, but obviously you're not there. I assume you met at a conference at some point, or you exchanged papers somewhere along the line?
No, we never met, actually. I was asked by email.
Okay.
But I could contribute a chapter. I think maybe David Stahill came across my work because what I'm working on is not very famous or not very known outside of Europe or outside of West Europe or even Luxembourg, so that Luxembourgers were even involved in the Wehrmacht. So that's why I was asked, and I was happy to contribute a chapter.
Brilliant stuff. Well, you've got a few slides, but we're going to just have a conversation about it. So the first thing, as we were just talking before going live there, is this the realization that we use terms, we often use Russians when we mean Soviet Union, we use Germans when in fact we mean the greater Third Reich and its armies. And so when you're researching into specifically Luxembourg, do you find that people generally kind of forget that there were all these other elements that made up the German army? And we think of it in kind of war movie terms of everybody being very German and very Prussian. Is it difficult to remind people that it is a very multinational force?
Yes, every time, at every conference, I have to remind people that this Wehrmacht was not just German or just more like a multinational army, and that among the 18 million men were not only like Germans. I mean, I'm not talking here about, of course, the Austrians, of course, but as well French, Silesians, Belgians, and South Tyroleans, Slovenes, Poles, Czechs. So it was like very, very multinational. But they were considered for the Wehrmacht then as German. I mean, of course, they were that different like racial hierarchies, but they were then conscripted as Germans.
Yeah.
And then so I kind of give always like a different, like a small lectures. No, that's not true. Even Luxembourgers were like this one of the smallest numbers for sure among the non-Germans. I mean, I just call them non-Germans. It's just easier than just to say like the French means actually the Alsatians, the Lorrainers, etc. So the non-Germans, and of course in Luxembourg sometimes definitely for military expert, they know where Luxembourg is, but sometimes I have to explain or to show during my conference presentations where is Luxembourg, just to show like to show the dimensions about it.
And remind us, for those who are unfamiliar, that with what was Luxembourg's official stance within the war, because we have when it comes to the countries that serve with the Axis, obviously there are some that effectively change sides halfway through the war. There are others that are kind of willingly signing up for everything, the ideology, others that are kind of incorporated into. How would you classify Luxembourg's, participation perhaps isn't the right word, but involvement?
Yeah. So Luxembourg was actually at the same time occupied as like Belgium and the Netherlands in May 1940. So it was, I think, Luxembourg neighbors Germany. So I think the defense was like maybe 2-3 hours. Yeah. Luxembourg didn't have an army. They had like a volunteer brigade army like. But of course not strong enough to hold hold back the German forces. So Luxembourg was overrun, but like militarily, and then a civil occupation administration was established with the goal to annex Luxembourg to the German Reich, because Luxembourg was considered like as the lost territory. There was as well like campaigns to get it back. I mean, like from the Holy Roman Empire, because once the Luxembourgers, like the dynasty of the Luxembourgers, also were the emperors even. very long time ago, very long time ago. But anyway, so Luxembourg was always considered by the Germans, or by the Nazis especially, as like lost heritage, lost territory, and they were considered as like ethnic German, like they are like German like, and also by blood. So for them it was like obvious, well, from the Nazi perspective, that Luxembourg would become a part of the German Reich. But it was planned. But it was still during the war from 1940 and until the liberation of 1944-45, like a administration, like a civil administration under Simon. Simon, exactly.
So effectively, the Germans thought it would be like an easy sell, because when they look at the various countries of Europe, they're the ones that they consider, as you say, more kind of Germanic, more traditionally German values, German, ancestry, German background, German language to some extent. And then there are others further down the list that they think of in a very different, negative, the Slavic countries. So were they assuming from the Third Reich's point of view it would go fairly smoothly once they had, as you say, there wasn't much of an army to put up much of a fight, so it was quite swift, the movement? Did they assume it would go smoothly and they would find enough people within Luxembourg to kind of buy into the Nazi ideology, or was it a tougher deal kind of politically than they're expecting?
Both sides, I guess. Of course, there was like civil collaboration for sure, because when the Germans didn't have even enough staff for everything. I mean, everything was, of course, Germanized. They brought in even German teachers to the schools were Germanized. French was banned as a language completely. So, of course, without the collaboration with the locals, it wouldn't have happened. I mean, like everywhere, I guess, and it's like all of Europe, right? You need always like locals. There were, of course, people who were welcoming to the Nazis, and there was already like movements like similar to the Nazi Party, to the NSDAP. Yes, there was like similar movement, similar party, and they then, of course, like became more powerful, and they as well filled up like leadership positions in the public sector, but also in the private sector. But there was as well resistance, and especially the resistance became like a little bit like more popular. There were, of course, like organizations with flyers, etc. But when the conscription order was announced, there was a strike, because for the Nazis, like Luxembourg had very rich mines, for example, especially for steel. I mean, of course, for a war you need steel. And so there were quite many locals who then did organize a strike over the whole nation, and this was considered like as a resistance act. There was as well arrests by the Gestapo. Many people were sent to concentration camps, so there was kind of like a resistance movement as well, like also not just for their smaller organization, like smaller groups, but also like nationwide. But this was, of course, very quick by the Nazis, was how do you say, stopped, right? Yeah. So because they arrested the main people and they also executed them. So there was like kind of course, like we have collaborations, but also as well here the resistance, both ways.
Well, thank you. And then obviously the main subject we're going to talk about is the conscription. And this is something that obviously the Germans are doing across Europe, and it's everything from completely voluntary to absolutely pressed into service against your will. I mean, the Germans are doing all aspects of recruitment across Europe. So how does it all begin within Luxembourg, and what were the Germans' intentions? What did they tell the people of Luxembourg they wanted? How would you describe the process of obviously, as you say, they need materials, they need minerals, they need steel, but they also need manpower. So how did the process begin?
Of course, with the occupation, like not only in Luxembourg, but for example also in the Netherlands and Belgium, the recruitment campaign started, especially for the Waffen-SS, I mean, as well for the Wehrmacht actually. But then they wanted volunteers, and volunteers were welcomed, and especially as well from the so-called Germanic countries, because Luxembourg, like I said, was like considered as like ethnic German or like the lost territory. So and then I have here, for example, my first slide. Can I click on that?
Just your left and right arrows on your keyboard.
Thank you.
There we go.
So they already welcomed between 40 and 42 men who wanted to volunteer already as well for the Wehrmacht. So not everybody, for example, from the Netherlands could like could volunteer for the Wehrmacht already, mostly than for the SS or Waffen-SS. But here the men, because like I said, considered as like almost like German, were welcomed already. And then as well for the women, in May 41, there was like a mandatory labor service was already established as well for the women to serve, for example, in munition factories, like in the Reich as well, like doing like farming mostly as well for the men and then for the women. And then it's in August 42, the conscription order then was announced, not only in Luxembourg, but also in Alsace and Moselle. The department Moselle was announced. And this, I mean, military experts after the winter 41-42, also many historians say, because of course, because of the war in the Soviet Union, so the Wehrmacht needed men. Because it was sometimes it's interesting why they announced already in 41 the labor service like conscription for everybody, but not for the military. They waited over a year, but this has a different aspect. There's like the chef of the leader of the administration as well from Alsace-Lorraine, like talked with Hitler. Some people say they didn't want that in the beginning because they feared maybe the consequences or the resistance. But then still this conscription order was announced in 42. So, I mean, here, of course, it's obvious because of the lack of men at the Eastern Front. But I would also say because of, how to say, not enough collaboration, or not because the Nazis in Luxembourg expected a lot of volunteers for Waffen-SS, but this campaign was actually failed. It failed. They had some, yes, but in the end it failed. So they expected or they wanted even more men, not just of course for the army itself, but my opinion is that what I believe it's also for the education, like to force the young people into this German a people's community to really give them like this harsh training to make them like Nazis, because I mean the Luxembourgers didn't grow up in the German Reich. I mean then the 40 all the Nazi organizations also were established in Luxembourg, like the Hitler Youth, like also for the girls, for the students. So they were of course many Nazi organizations, but the young men didn't grow up with that. They grew up in a conservative country, yes, but still in a free country where they didn't weren't forced to serve like in the Hitler Youth. So the 42, so it was just of course for the men, like for the lack of men, but as well for like to include them into this Nazi ideology and to raise them in this Nazi spirit. I would say. And at the time it was as well, it was not very clear. It was planned, like I said, the annexation was planned, but still most Luxembourgers didn't have the right German citizenship. They were still considered as ethnic Germans, like German, right? But they entered actually the Wehrmacht with like to be a foreign national, and they later got the German citizenship. And here I explain it like as a legal loophole that they didn't receive like full citizenship, like with all the rights, but it was like a citizenship on probation, I would say, like a citizenship light. So maybe they could be taken away again if they were naughty. I don't know how to say that, but it's just like as well, of course, against also back then against international law to recruit foreign nationals into your national army. But still, I mean, it was done. But here then, of course, then the man, I mean, here's a picture of the draft office in Luxembourg, then got right German citizenship as well as their spouses or the children later on. But this was in the first time not really considered, and I think as well it took a little bit some time for the lawyers or for the legal experts, because they said as well, based on our conscription law, on the right German conscription law, we cannot conscript or like apply this mandatory service also on foreign citizens. So I think this was like also in dispute among the German lawyers, I guess. But still, when this loophole was then found, so we have in August the conscription order, but also at the same time the citizenship order. So to like clarify, so actually they will then become also like German citizens.
Well, thank you for that. I want to just go back to when you said about the trying to get people to volunteer period that you said wasn't very successful. What was there a specific way the Nazis tried to sell the idea of service, for example, within the Waffen-SS in Luxembourg? Because with the other shows we've done in this series, sometimes they're very much selling the ideology, you know, it's anti-Bolshevik, anti-Jewish, that kind of, sometimes they're selling it like with Italians yesterday, more of a, you're controlling your own destiny a little bit by having a say in the Third Reich. Sometimes it's more sort of basic about, you know, you get to wear a uniform, you earn some money, you travel the world kind of thing. Was there a way that they tried it that you think is the way that, did they get it wrong? Was there a better way they could have done it? How did they do it? And could they have done it better from the Third Reich's point of view? Obviously not from our point of view.
Better way. Interesting. Yeah, I never thought about it like that. I always just read it failed. That was it. So reading post-trial files, young man tried to explain why they joined. And it's like mostly I have to say we're this adventurer, you know, like this typical will wish to travel abroad, and as well the lack of a Luxembourgish army. So as well, people said like some joined the Hitler Youth because like the Scouts movement in Luxembourg was back then and now is also very, very strong. So there was already like a community, you know, like organized youth movement. And so I think younger men joined the Waffen-SS because of that, because I know of this community and to travel and to be able to wear a uniform. Then as well, we have, because Luxembourg is so interconnected in this greater region. I mean, it's called like the greater region because it's like connected, you know, with France, with Germany and Belgium. So we have many families who were like binationals. Like, for example, the mother was German or the father was German, and then the boy, you know, grew up in Luxembourg. And sometimes, of course, the family was important. Sometimes the family was pro-Nazi, pro-German. And then they maybe forced that child or the boy into the service because they knew they couldn't, because if, for example, a Luxembourgish woman married or other around, for example, a German a woman married a Luxembourgish, she lost her citizenship, so she became Luxembourgish. But you know, still like she maybe still like raised her boy like pro-German. So anyway, I wanted to say it's about, you know, as well like family ties to Germany. So there were of course many pro-German families. So maybe because of that. Then we have as well partially, I talked a little bit in the beginning about this kind of army, like this volunteer army. They were like partially like gendarmerie, police, they had, but also like border control duties. These men were partially as well forcibly incorporated into the German police, but some of them even had to were forced to serve in the Waffen-SS. So we have also like people who were moved, like not in the Wehrmacht or in the German police, but also partially in Waffen-SS. So we have like different groups here. But that I would say maybe as well they didn't in the beginning. I mean, they announced a recruitment campaign or the posters quite in maybe later in summer in fall 40, and it takes some time, I guess, when it like gets like from the perspective of the Nazis successful, and then in 42 they then decided to conscript to publish the conscription orders. So maybe they would have waited a little bit longer. Maybe as well the news from the Eastern Front, because like it didn't turn out that successful. Many reasons, but that's mainly, I think.
Well, thanks for answering my weird question there. So with the conscription, and obviously we're going to go into a bit more detail about now, is that there was kind of two different ways the Germans could have approached this. They either, as indeed the Allies did, keep the people from Luxembourg within units with a strong sort of Luxembourg heritage, Luxembourg officers, Luxembourg flags, insignia, kind of within the Nazis, as they did with some others, or you just bring them in and you scatter them. You use them as regular recruits, and they just go into the recruit pool, and you put 10 in the engineers and 5 in the infantry, and you just use them as basically recruits. Which method did the Germans use with Luxembourg?
They were not enough.
They're not enough, right?
So, I mean, we talk here about like the birth years between 20 and 27. So in the beginning, we were just a couple of hundreds. And then, like the next month, a couple of hundreds more. They first have to be trained. And, it depends, of course, here, like in the draft office, maybe some people were evaluated as not fit enough, or they will like transferred maybe to other branches. So they were not enough people. I mean, in the beginning, I think I have it here on the slide. In total, like from 42 until 40 and 44, but even till 45, I was still recruited. Just 10,000. I mean, yes, with 10,000 you can like have a unit. But I think they're still not enough. And as well, I've seen it as with the French and with the Silesians, with the Slovenes, with the South Tyrolians. They were not in one unit, like not as they weren't like in Waffen-SS. They were not a national units, because this was not the idea. The idea was they're all Germans. They're all right. So there was not a Luxembourgish unit, and this was as well on purpose. They were scattered or like deployed on every front. I can talk a bit later on about then the German-Soviet war, but they were distributed among every unit, among every really front. In the end, they did that as well with, like I said, with the other forced conscripts. And it was as well, I've seen one order, this was even planned, because to avoid like fraternization, or so the unit should kept like the French Alsatians and the Luxembourgers and the Belgians like under 5% per unit.
Right.
So of course, here and there, I've seen 1 or 2 Luxembourgs are in the same reserve battalion. Yes, here and there, but mostly they were among Reich Germans as well, to make not to make it easier, but to help them to be more Germans, or to Germanize them more, for sure. And not to speak French, for example, because in the letters I have read, they sometimes enjoyed not to speak German, but for example French with the Alsatians.
Which brings us, to me asking you about the work you've done, the research, the letters, because I'm assuming if they're scattered within the entire German army, then therefore there is no universal experience of the soldier who was conscripted in Luxembourg within the German army. It depends on where you end up, which campaign, which theater, which unit you're with, and how you as an individual adapt to it. Do you kind of embrace it and just, okay, well, I'm German then? Or do you kind of fight it from the beginning and try and keep your own, independent separate viewpoints. So what sources were available to you as a historian to do this? I mean, were you able to find stuff within Luxembourg? Was it within Germany? Was it across Europe?
As you just said, it's very, very difficult to find in the official records, in the official unit diaries, like even traces of Luxembourgers. So I used mostly personal testimonies.
Right.
But Luxembourgers appear when they do something wrong. So
Right.
here mostly when they disobey. So I have like hundreds of desertion files, like trial files. So here they appear again. They were. It's not like a group of like a court was responsible for the Luxembourgers. I mean, it was easier to trace them based on the location of the court, of the military court, because most of the desertion happened. They didn't return back to the unit, so it happened during the home leave. So they were sent home after a year or 6 months, and then everything was fine, and then they had to return to their units. Of course, they didn't. So the majority of them left. They never left the country. So they just went into hiding. Maybe some people went to Belgium or to France, and they were fighting with the Maquis. But so mostly then the court, like the was then a transfer to the closest, like the case was transferred then to the closest court, and this was then, for example, Couplans. And then here, then I found many documents. They were targeting the Luxembourgers as well. For the French, then the court was, for example, then in Metz or Strasbourg. There was like military court. In Luxembourg there was no military court, so that's why I had to look at the over the border, like the next administration, or like the military court. So like that I found Luxembourgers again, but yes, they're like completely like invisible soldiers, because they're among all the numbers. So it's very difficult, really. I've tried some units where I knew they were Luxembourgers, like to find something, even awards, something, like here and there. Yes, like a Luxembourgish name popped up, because some last names are very, very typical Luxembourgish. So like that, maybe I could find them. But in the end, it was very, very difficult. And yes, there is no general narrative. I mean, most of them served at the Eastern Front because they were sent there on purpose. This was then, I found again, like the order on the highest level, that they were like, the military was afraid they would maybe desert even more when they would fight at the Western Front, because they could speak French, and this is like closer to home. Then, of course, it was much more difficult to desert in Belarus, for example. So the majority of them were fighting in the German-Soviet war, but we find as well Luxembourgers in Belgium, in France, and North Africa, many as well. So everywhere. So in the end, of course, we find them everywhere. But my main source were personal testimonies.
So, going from what you said there about the fact there are you found quite a lot of records of when they get in trouble. So it's various sort of levels of discipline and court martial, and then of course desertions. That makes it kind of lends the idea that it didn't work very well from the German point of view. If there are desertions and there are discipline problems, then it seems that the benefits are outweighed by the negatives. I mean, as you said there, it's not like they're getting hundreds of thousands of men to fill up their armies. It's a few thousand, some of whom are not suitable for frontline service, because, as you said, Luxembourg hasn't maybe got quite hasn't had the Hitler Youth, maybe not quite got the military tradition in some ways of other European nations. So if they're not getting good quality troops, there's discipline problems, and there's they're having to put them to the Russian front. Do you think did the Germans expect it to go better than it did? Did they go into it thinking, well, we don't trust this lot, but we need men, let's see how it goes? Or are they more confident, you think, that it will work and it doesn't work in practice? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think in the beginning it was surprising that even
Right.
like I think they were surprised by the high desertion rates, like especially during home leave, because then there was a leave ban, especially for the Luxembourgers and for the Alsatians. So of course, the higher command, like Okaha, knew kind of course learned that something is going on there, so we have to react. So that's why, of course, like many were sent to east, while, for example, the Salesians, most in theory, were sent to the west, like exchange, like from the different regions to the different fronts. But so there was like a leave ban because they thought maybe if they cannot go home anymore, they won't desert. And I'm talking here about really not the majority, but the majority
Yeah.
of this men stayed in German uniform.
Yeah.
This is, but also historians found that among the Luxembourgs, there were, compared to the right Germans, there was a high desertion rate. It's like 34%. There was a high desertion rate. Yes, of course, this can be attributed to the fact that these people, Germany occupied their home country, then they were first to fight for them. Of course, there was like a dilemma between like I don't want to fight. It's not my fatherland, but I'm kind of forced to, and I'm using the first opportunity to leave. But the people were also, of course, aware. You cannot just desert in Belarus, in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Just go home. I mean, either you defect to the Red Army, or you just have to follow and to survive somehow. So I mean, it is a high desertion rate, but I wouldn't put too much attention to that because still the majority remained in the Wehrmacht and didn't do anything about it. I mean, there was also, of course, the fear. There was like a little study that why Luxembourgers deserted. So most of them in the trials, if they were caught, if there was even, because most of the trials I found were like happened, or the people were sentenced in absentia because these people were hiding in France or in Luxembourg somewhere. But anyway, when they were caught and they were interrogated, then they asked like why. So then we see as well like the same reasons or similar reasons as like the Germans, fear of fighting. You just want to get away from a war. You fear for your relatives, your family, so you want to just to go away. But there was never kind of said like, well, I'm anti-Hitler. I'm not German. Maybe they thought that, but it's not like the main reasons. It's like also like we go then back to the similar reasons as for the right Germans. But still, yes, we have a high rate, but like I said, it's the majority remained in the grey uniform.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple of questions, several questions coming. So William is asking, how did this dynamic, the Luxembourg dynamic, perhaps compare to other similar regions, such as that were deemed Germanic, such as Danzig and Alsace? Because as we said at the beginning, you've traveled extensively in Europe. You've presented papers in different countries, consulted with other historians. Is it too easy to make a comparison with Germans from Alsace and Germans other? Is the Luxembourg case similar to them, or do you think it's sort of distinctly different? And if it's different, what would the reasons for it being different be?
It's very, very similar, especially with the West European affected regions. I mean, like it's like Alsace and Lorraine or Moselle. But we work together as well for a conference with colleagues from Poland and from Slovenia. So here we have to, mostly Slovenians are always forgotten. They're also there. Very, very similar. I mean, yes, here and there it was different. How like the entry, like how the Nazis made the entry for these people into the Wehrmacht, because like for example in Silesia we have the different how do we call it, people's list, Volksliste 1, 2, 3, right? So a little bit different than just for the Germans, for the Luxembourgers as like ethnic Germans, so they received direct German citizenship, like partially automatically, as well the Alsatians. Slovenians also is divided between the two regions in Slovenia, but I would say Luxembourg as like So we have, for example, I'm now speaking about the nations. Now Poland, for example, here we have just a part of the people who were affected, but they lived kind of together with like Poles, for example, right? There were like Salesians living. I mean, of course, we have regions where like it was mostly Salesians or like mostly Poles, but still they kind of lived together. And as well in France, there were of course like French citizens, and then of course Alsacians. Not everybody was conscripted in a village, while Luxembourg was like completely affected as a nation, and this was kind of like a nationwide phenomenon. Also in Slovenia it was different with the two different regions. So that I would say it's different as well than for the narrative later on. I mean, even like for France has a very strong Second World War victimization narrative, while then Alsace is always like excluded a bit, because this is like was then turned around. Anyway, that's another topic. But we see similar events. For example, I would here call like the conscription order. So I see a lot of similarities with Slovenia as well, but also like the consequences. For example, if a Luxembourg or deserted, his family was then arrested, and kind of there was like a family liability, and they were then relocated to Poland. This happened as well, partially in Alsace, but also like in Slovenia. That's also in Silesia was not that, I think, common. But like I said, I'm not an expert here on Silesian history. But so we have different dynamics how the commentator described it. But in the end, it's still like similar dynamics. It's occupation. It's also like the not just about of the territory, but as well over the people.
Yeah.
And the people then, were kind of exposed or like forced over to serve in the German army. I mean, I didn't say much about Belgium. They have like a small part, East Belgium, the German speaking part. They were also just 8,000, so even less. But they was a little bit more complicated because they were part of Germany actually. I mean, Luxembourg was never, except in the whole empire, right, 1,000 years ago, was part of Germany. But Alsace was, but Luxembourg wasn't. So anyway, so we have of course similarities and differences. So we can over like a long list, establish a long list. But in the end, so I see that as like we tried at a conference in 2022 to talk about it as like a European experience. And it was one Euclid. In the end, it was like an occupation and like like a rule over territory, over people, and like forcing them, in their services.
You hit on something that I want to expand on. I'm also going to ask Andreas's question. Andreas is in Germany. Were the families of deserters punished in Luxembourg with something like Sippenhaft? So, I mean, I wanted to touch on France because that's where I live. Because there's always that collateral effect. Is that the Germans are going out to get more people for their army, which doesn't work very well because you say a 30% desertion rate. But what happens? What's the feeling within Luxembourg among the people? So they've been occupied by the Germans in 1940. So when they start seeing, and presumably some Luxembourg military got killed, some came back with wounds. How is that affecting the public opinion about the war, about Hitler, about their own situation?
Yes, I talked already about family liability. Around 4,000 family members were relocated. I mean, you can see not only from soldiers, because in the beginning I mentioned this strike and the resistance movements, and even the family members of the resistance movement members were partially arrested and then relocated to the General Gouvernement, for example, in now Poland. So, and then as well, from the deserters, or as well draft evaders. So we have also a big number of draft evaders. So we never followed the conscription order. So they never wore the German uniform, but they got the order. Anyway, so this is a quite big phenomenon, or big part of the national narrative in Luxembourg, but also like family members, like elderly women, elderly men, also children, and the spouses were then relocated. Their assets were frozen. They lost their house. The house was given then to Nazi leaders. So it's like they lost a lot. Also, of course, their lives partly. In these camps, in these relocation camps, it wasn't so I don't say as well deportation, I say relocation. It was not, of course, the same environment as a concentration camp, but they had to work, but they had schools, they had like days off, they had celebrations, but still, of course, it was war. It was definitely a terrible time for them, and then they will then liberated by the Red Army. Anyway, but that was yes, that was very common, and I see also in the letters the fear of the Sippenhaft, or it's called in German Umsiedlung, like the relocation was real. And they talked already like in the letters about it, or they shared news. Did you hear that this family was relocated again, or like did you know that the next ones are on the list, etc. So this was a fact that Nazis really did it, but not on the scale as the people were afraid of. So there's now also a study that this was like, of course, like rumors, etc., that the next will be, like I will be like next and tomorrow, and it was partially as well very random which family was relocated. So sometimes like depends as well on the procedures. I mean, after a desertion, or after for example the soldier has his home leave for 2 weeks, and he has to be back out to report back at his unit in Hungary, and it takes like 10 days to travel there until the unit notices that he's gone, and then the letters has to arrive like in Luxembourg. So sometimes it gave them like 2 months in between, or even longer, that they notice something, and then they start like a trial. And then, for example, the military authorities also work together with the police in Luxembourg. So they exchanged names. For example, like this man didn't show up at his unit in Hungary, so please go and interrogate his family members and ask them where he is. That took again like some time. So in between, there was like this order to relocate this family, and then it was lost. And so anyway, so it happened, yes, but it was not completely like major impact on the whole society. But of course, the majority of the Luxembourgers didn't welcome the Germans. They kind of assimilate. They kind of live with that. They just had to live from day to day. I mean, find as well food, and to feed their children, and to survive. Many just joined as well, like the Luxembourgish Nazi Party, just to be able to work as a lawyer, to have his shop. So it's like, I think like this happened all over Europe. So so the majority, of course, was against the occupation, but then I think, but still, then I have to say as well, the majority assimilated as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I was interested in what you were saying about the families and those that avoided the draft, because just referencing France briefly, that there were, of course, all these rallying cries from across the French government in England and across the empire of we must fight for freedom. But the biggest instigator of enlistment in the French resistance was after the Germans cranked up the STO order, the Service Travail Obligataire, when they wanted thousands more for the factories, and young men simply ran away from that order, found themselves in the forests. I'm saying this for the benefit of some of the viewers who don't know this, and then ended up in the resistance. But their motivation first was escaping, working for the Germans, and then serving in the resistance became the secondary part of that journey, if you like. But it completely backfired on the Germans, because they didn't get the workers they wanted, and B, what they did is they fueled and armed a resistance against them. So from the German point of view about Luxembourg, you're talking about conscripting not many thousands of men with a high desertion rate. Do you think the Germans would have been better off just not doing it at all? I mean, what did they get any benefit out of it? I mean, we had a couple of comments in the sidebar about presumably they went into kind of the more static roles, anti-aircraft engineers, road building, or were as many of them sent into frontline infantry units? What type of units did they get put into, or was it too many variations?
Just to on your comment about, so I also wonder until today that, I mean, I hear on the slide is like there was already like this mandatory right labor service. So men, of course, they had some draft evaders there already, as well women, partially. But some thought like they go for 6 months and then they come back, and then the Nazis might be satisfied and that's it. So, and it was not fighting at the time. And then it kind of, to use your term, backfired, really backfired. Then they had even more problems because, like I said about this strike, really it was like a huge strike, and they lost really a few days of like working like steel right for their war machinery. So it really kind of backfired, and I think until then the Luxembourgers kind of said like, oh, well, somehow it worked, even their Grand Duchess fled the country, but still it kind of was okayish. There were here and there some wrong or like mistakes by the British Air Force, that because they bombed Luxembourg, but this was just by mistake. So until then, Luxembourg was spared by big battles. So it was still, I mean, of course, they felt the economic consequences because of the food supplies, etc. But it was, I would say, kind of still livable until then they wanted to take the boys away. Then I think it kind of backfired, and then of course they started to evade and to join the resistance and the Maquis, like in France. About the question, I forgot again.
What units they ended up in? What type of units?
Yes, thank you. I cannot say. That's the problem, because we don't have an overview. Actually, I should go. I mean, we have the names of mostly of the 10,000 Luxembourgers, but we have to go then to the German archive and check every name, and we didn't do that. We did that maybe even for 500. That even took some time. Cannot say. I have the feeling, yes, mostly infantry for sure, but I found also Luxembourg's navy on submarines, of course, Air Force less, maybe 1 or 2, but like I said, but mostly, of course. But here is again 42. They needed men in infantry. So right, of course, I did artillery as well. Yes, artillery as well, but mostly army then. Yes, here, but I cannot have an overview. No, it's not possible.
Okay, thank you. So I want to move it towards what happened at the end of the war, because every European country has to deal with its immediate past, those that were occupied, those that were willingly part of the Axis, those that fought against it, people returning. So if I'm keeping track, there were kind of sort of 3 distinct groups of Luxembourgers in terms of military: those that completely resisted the draft, hid, ran away, joined the resistance; those that were conscripted and then deserted and ran away; those that volunteered at the very beginning, and those that were conscripted. So sort of 3 groups of people who were liable for military service. How did the people of Luxembourg treat those different groups at the end of the war? Presumably, if you had resisted, if you deserted, if you've drafted, you just assimilate back into Luxembourg life in 1945. What if you had been conscripted? What was the feeling amongst their families, amongst society, when the war ends and you have been wearing the field grey uniform for several years? How were you treated?
So first I would make use an example here, for example, for the people who were prisoners of war in
Right.
Tambov, like in
Yeah.
the Soviet captivity. They were released quite early, in
Right.
45 already, the most of them. I mean, the French first, then the Luxembourgers. So they arrived by train in Luxembourg City, and one author, Peter Quadflick, described that they were welcomed, this whole group. Some were welcomed with flowers, and some were welcomed with handcuffs.
Right.
You can imagine the ones who were welcomed with flowers were their ordinary conscripted soldiers, and the ones who were welcomed with handcuffs were the volunteers. And Luxembourg was, or still partially is, a very close-knit country. So
Yeah.
people knew when you volunteered, even for the Wehrmacht or for the
Right.
Waffen-SS. I mean, for the Waffen-SS, it is more obvious. Sometimes it's difficult for us also to distinguish, if somebody was in uniform before August 42, then it's clear he volunteered. But sometimes even, after 42, we don't know. So, I mean, people claimed after the war a lot.
Yeah.
So this was, of course, perceived like these volunteers were perceived by the country as traitors. They were directly put into prison and then trialed. So that's why I use also for my research. I mean, now my current research is the Waffen-SS, so it's actually quite yeah. I here I can contribute a little bit more. So they were treated as traitors. Some got lifelong sentences, but then there was also an amnesty law in the 50s. So they were then released, but many served like a minimum 5 years or even longer in prison. So they were considered as traitors. While for the deserters, that's easy. They're heroes, for sure. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, also draft evaders, also people who helped them, the resistance fighters were then in the end as well the heroes. While the majority of the men, except they were ordinary soldiers, they just followed orders to survive, or maybe some of might enjoyed it, but still the majority were invisible soldiers,
Yeah.
and they came home. It was difficult. Partially, they were considered as well as victims, because the name for the conscripted soldiers, I mean, it's not honoré de force like in French, for the Alsatian is incorporé de force, but we have here a forced. So they were like forced soldiers, but in the term of the Luxembourgers, they were called our boys, uns Jungen. So it's kind of has already this victimization. So like, because they took our boys, I mean, like, because the men were young, the men were like 18, 19, 20 years old. So of course they want to start families, etc. So they were still boys in the eyes of the parents. So it was partially like, of course, like a victimization. And as well as they were even that's a little bit contradictory. They were considered as well as like a sacrifice, because they knew if they wouldn't follow the order, their family would have been relocated, and they kind of sacrificed themselves to save the family. So we have both. We have like victims, but we have also like they sacrifice themselves, and so that's why they put on the gray uniform to fight against the enemies of the Nazis, to save their family in the end. But then there were also many competition with the resistance, like with the real resistance, really, who were like lost their lives fighting against the Nazis. And there was like a really decades long competition between the resistance groups and the conscripted groups. So it's and as well was again, of course, about money, about awards. The veteran group, I mean, here from the conscripted soldiers, even found a political party, and they were even voted into parliament to fight for their own rights to get more money. So it was quite interesting. Then again, after the war, it became like again like a little fight between the different groups. But until now, this people, because this 10,000 is the biggest group, or as well like the family members who were affected directly by the war. I mean, the Jewish population was so small. There was, of course, a German population, right? There were, like I said, the resistance fighters who also died in concentration camps, yes. But this is like still was the biggest group in Luxembourg. Back then in the 40s, Luxembourg had 260,000 local inhabitants, and then 10,000. It's like quite everybody knew everybody, and everybody had like a son, a nephew, a cousin who was in the German army.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Lance asked about the number of killed in actions, and when last time you were on World War II TV, you talked about burials post the Ardennes, and I'm assuming those that fell within the Wehrmacht, they're just buried within German cemeteries around the world. I guess they weren't treated with any difference because they were from Luxembourg, I assume. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, that's the interesting way of. Yes, there were. I did, like I said, I'm out of the project now since 2 years. It's like around also together 3,000 around. Also died in captivity. Died, of course, were killed in action or missing in action. Yes, they are buried on German cemeteries. I mean, then as well here we have again this picture from the German military cemeteries that they are Germans only, but we have as well cemeteries where Flemish, Dutch, Waffen as volunteers are buried. So it's not just German, right? Yeah, they are among the Germans buried there, and but I've never seen like a petition to move them away, or I mean some family members did transfer them back to Luxembourg, but mostly they are among the Germans.
Okay, thank you. Andreas asked, did you know if any of the Luxembourgers ended up being held as POWs in the Soviet Union until 1955? I mean, we've discussed that with Susan Grunwald in the past. Are there any cases of Luxembourgers having a really, really bad time at the hands of the Soviets?
No, I don't know if anybody. Most of them were released in 45. I mean, maybe 46. Maybe, right? So for some, maybe they're stuck somewhere, or they couldn't prove their Luxembourgish identity. I know about French and Salesians, yes.
Yeah.
But not Luxembourgers. But if somebody knows something, I'm always learning as well, then let me know. But from my knowledge, no.
Well, this is one of the interesting things about having someone like yourself on there. If I want to bring on a student of Operation Market Garden, I can think of 30 or 40 authors in Britain alone, let alone around the rest of the world. With something like this, I'm assuming you're one of really one people studying this at any length. It's not exactly something that thousands of historians are looking at. So it's both exciting in some ways that you are forging this path of studying this, but also in some ways frustrating that it's not a wider field where there's other work you can draw on, because I'm assuming you're pretty much doing the sole work on this project.
Well, Luxembourg is not. I mean, we were here quite like a little team, so it's not just me who studied the first conscripted from Luxembourg. But I wish I could work more together with European colleagues, especially from Poland and from Slovenia. They are wonderful colleagues, but I wish we would like start like a common project on that, on this phenomenon, because this is so much still to learn. Especially not just from West Europe, because we have comparisons between Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. Almost, I mean, of course, many studies on France, but not from the Central European part. So here, I hope we can learn more and get new knowledge about it. Yeah.
Well, before I kind of ask you my last question, is there anything else you wanted to show on your slides before we kind of bring this to an end? Because I know we ended up having a chat about all sorts of things, but anything else of examples of things you wanted to particularly share with us?
I want just to share like a special story from a defector to the Red Army, but this can be read also in the article in that chapter. So I don't want to stretch the show.
Okay, no problem. So my last question really is, what in your research what has this told you A, about Luxembourg, and B, about the Third Reich's use of foreign nationals, because that's one of the themes of Jeff's book is the experiences of not just Germans and Russians. It is this wider understanding of the Eastern Front. So what does it tell us about the Third Reich's policy about incorporating nationals? I mean, as we've discussed, it basically didn't go very well for the Germans. Is that the conclusion, or is there something sort of deeper than that?
Well, yes, it didn't go very well. I think what the Nazis didn't or underestimated is as well the resistance, or like the unwilling collaboration, that they cannot just conscript foreign nationals. They were completely surprised by this strike. I mean, it sounds like nothing, but was a big event here in Luxembourg after the announcement of the conscription order. So this is, I think, what I didn't expect, because like the first two years in occupation, nothing big happened in the country, in that country. So this is what they learned. In the end, if this is what I wanted to also find out, or like to, based on my research, were the Luxembourgers actually good soldiers? I mean, like asking from the perspective of the Wehrmacht, and reading evaluation by their commander. Either they really kept a low profile to really survive and just to get along with everybody, because they were, of course, they had to rely as well on the German comrades, because like you cannot just survive on the front alone. So you need to work together to survive. So in what I read were mostly good evaluations. That was quite interesting, but still, I would say what Reich, or like the Third Reich, learned from that. Luxembourg is here maybe not the best example, because the effect is so small, because there are not enough people. But as what you also said about the French, about the working force, they underestimated the resistance, or they don't get along with everybody, or they're not happy that they were occupied by the Nazis, or they were waiting for them. So yes, they kind of underestimated the national identity of these people, or the unwillingness, if you say it like that, of these people, because in the end, as well, I mean, we didn't have numbers for the Silesians, but I would love to have as well more numbers of the Silesians, because this was the biggest group of the forced conscripted soldiers, non-Germans. If they were also like a high desertion rate, I think so. I mean, I'm guessing here. So this is what they underestimated here. For Luxembourg, as well, maybe in the end surprised that still so many collaborated. But I think every country had then to come to terms with the collaborators, Netherlands, Belgium, everybody, France as well, maybe. But people really were opportunistic and really looked for advantages, economically, power. That maybe as well, the national narrative sometimes try to avoid, like tries to hide it, that they were actually as well like locals, Luxembourgish collaborators. But in the end, I think it's in every country, every war, every conflict, there are always, of course, people who collaborate with the occupier. So this is, I think, what Luxembourg makes not very special, but part of the European occupation experience.
I mean, I'm glad you said that last bit, because I was talking to Nicholas yesterday about no, it wasn't Nicholas, it was someone else this week, about Dr. Chris Millington over in Liverpool, and his work about France, where he says the words of resistance and collaboration are too loaded. He prefers the words defiance and accommodation, because as you said early on, resistance in its kind of conventional movie blowing up trains, sabotaging factories type thing isn't really as possible in somewhere like Luxembourg as it is somewhere maybe like, Belarus, with all the forests and swamps where people can go and hide and collect munitions. And as you say, the acceptance of occupation, if you've got very little in the way of a military to stop the occupying force, and you're very small and your population is small and you're not very big, these terms of collaboration and resistance, they're not wide enough to cover the variety of experiences in the various countries of Europe. And even within France, they're not broad enough. When you add, as you say, Belgium and Netherlands and Norway and Luxembourg and all these other territories, it's too complicated. We have to look at each country individually and kind of look at what were its options, what were its civilians capable of doing. As you said, that this idea of just doing what you can to keep your head down, to think of your family's survival in some ways being the priority, as opposed to being necessarily politically or motivated, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I use the word assimilation, but I think your word is better here, fits better with accommodation. Yes, in the end, I mean, what is resistance? This was also discussed Parliament and between many groups. Is something when I hide my nephew in my cellar, is this resistance, or I just help my family member? If I could distribute flyers, if I blow up railway tracks, what is that? Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Just being difficult with paperwork. Yeah. If someone stops you and says, show your pass, do this, if you're just difficult and make it complicated, and you're being defiant, you're making it awkward for the occupier. But sure, that's not the same as going out and, as I said earlier, blowing up a train. But anyway, it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you, Nina. And we've got one more show in this series where Baz is coming on tomorrow talking about fortress defense in 1945. But in the meantime, I wish you luck with all your research and your ongoing projects. And thank you very much for shedding light on the Luxembourg experience within the German military, because I think it's a subject clearly from the sidebar virtually nobody knew anything about. So everything they've got today has been new. So that's fantastic. So thank everybody. This is Paul Woodhatch for World War II TV saying I'll see you all again tomorrow. Cheers. Bye.